We've touched a little bit about the Big 12's TV deal and you mentioning, hey, they could open up some negotiations early here, but in general terms, what do you think the Big 12 is looking at? How strong of a position or weak of a position are they going to be in when it comes to that next TV deal as of right now?
I think, let's assume that it runs its course and they just go through the regular windows in a year or so. I think they'll be in a pretty good position. Things will have kind of settled down. Everybody will probably know the lay of the land by that point. I fully expect the Pac-12 to be done before the Big 12 gets into their window. The one tough thing for the Big 12 is that, you net you're adding two schools. So you've got two more mouths at the table you've got to feed. So if you say, at the end of their current deal, they're getting paid $40 million per school, right off the bat, your deal has to increase $80 million just to stay where you're at, because now you're dividing by 12 instead of 10. And that's a big jump. Again, I don't know what kind of deal, what kind of a deal that the new schools have, if they're getting a full share right off or if it gets phased in or what, but so that's a big jump to start. Beyond that, I think, again, if you can find some sort of a way to create a new streaming package that gets monetized. Big 12 doesn't have per se a conference channel. It's pretty much all resides on ESPN Plus as a result of, Longhorn Network and Oklahoma having their own, doing their own thing for the last number of years. So they don't have really a way to monetize that. I don't think you launch a channel in this day and age. It doesn't make sense. So you're looking at trying to, monetize your digital rights as much as possible, which they've done over the years with ESPN Plus. But I think they probably have to go another level beyond that.
You think, there's been discussion of playing more games on Thursday night, Friday night. I mean, heck, even different days of the week if you're going to be up against no competition with the fever that this country has for football. How much value tangibly can that actually add if the Big 12 were to do that? And is that the smart move and something you think they'll have to do?
I think they will. I mean, people like the primetime windows. I think that one of the helpful factors is that the Thursday night NFL is not on a broadcast network anymore. It's on Amazon Prime. So I'm sure there'll be a lot more collegiate games scheduled up against that NFL game than they would if it had been, remained on Fox. That's a good window. The Friday night window is, is very controversial always because of the high school football. Do you really want to bite the hand that feeds you your players? So, but there's some schools that do it. There's others that just flat out won't and don't like to play on that day. But there's special dates. There's Memorial or Labor Day, Thanksgiving, Black Friday is all of a sudden become a big day to do games. So I think you'll see a number of games outside the traditional Saturday window.
When BYU was being considered for the Big 12 last year and talk started to heat up about the four teams that eventually came to the conference, one thing I remember, I wish I could remember who reported it. I want to say maybe Dennis Dodd at CBS Sports, but there was a report out there at one point that TV networks had told the Big 12 BYU was the one school of the four that they were thinking about adding that would tangibly add value to the TV contract because of having a national fan base and the ability, I assume a part of it too, the ability to play in that later window, as you mentioned earlier. Do you see it that way? The BYU would be the one that really adds some value there. How do you kind of size up the four teams that the Big 12 is adding from a TV value standpoint?
Well, I think they all bring something a little different. Houston's a huge metropolitan area, and even though a lot of people might call it a commuter school, it's still an important, and they have a good program. Say UCF, gets them into Florida where they hadn't been before. Again, huge recruiting area, very important to be in that place. Cincinnati, did very well last year and has a better, program certainly on the upswing. Be interesting to see how they come back this year, and to have the ability for the Big 12 to kind of be in that Midwest area, which other than West Virginia, they really haven't, is going to be valuable. But the BYU thing, I think, is definitely important, because of the relationship with the church. That there's some issues with some of those things, primarily just, when will they play, that type of stuff. But all in all, I always thought the fan base, it's huge in Utah and it's huge around the country and it's even huge internationally. I mean, it's amazing. I've been doing deals with BYU all the way back when they were on the old blue and white network, in the early 90s, late 80s, and they've always drawn well. They always seem to compete very well. And I think for the Big 12, you add all those things together along with the window that, like I mentioned earlier, can be played at 8 Mountain, 7 Pacific. That's a good advantage for the Big 12 going forward.
I'm going to need you to put on your hat again to kind of break through whether or not this is reality or based in reality at all or not. But one thing I think Big 12 fans struggle with a lot is, and some of this has been backed up by Bob Bowlesby last year with his tortious interference claims against ESPN. But, when you see the fact that ESPN is out on the Big 10 and think, all right, well, that probably means ESPN is going to be involved in some way with the Big 12. There's a lot of mistrust, I think, there with ESPN right now. And hey, did they really try to break up our conference last year? Like what could they do in the future here? How legitimate is mistrust from Big 12 fans toward ESPN right now, and what could potentially happen in the future?
Well, I could see how that mistrust might be there, but let me assure you that it's not the networks driving the train on this realignment. Not in my estimation. I mean, I've dealt with all the collegiate conferences over the years. I have had conversations with commissioners and athletic directors about, is there value if we had this team or that team? But I never recall walking into a commissioner's office and say, look, you really need to go out and get these guys. That's just not how they operate. I mean, is there discussions? Absolutely. I mean, we have discussions, weekly. Every week you get together to select games. There's discussions with the conference, but I don't think it's the networks driving the this whole expansion thing. I can understand how from the outside and looking at it, people might think that, and I'm sure was the initial reaction when OU and Texas went over, and it's the initial reaction when USC and UCLA went over. But I just don't see it. I mean, the conferences are very astute. They have their consultants and they have their people who look at these things constantly, and it's driven by more than just TV. You're looking for academic fit, you're looking for cultural fit, you're looking to where your alumni are. There's just a variety of things that go into it, and it's just and then also obviously the value they would bring to a potential TV contract. And so see, put out this notion that TV's running absolutely everything. I just find it hard to believe. The conference commissioners are not puppets, and we don't pull strings, and they react as we pull the string. It just doesn't work that way.
Well, the last real hot button issue I have for you, I think from Big 12 country, has been tons of discussion back and forth about who is actually more valuable, the remaining schools in the Pac-12, the remaining schools in the Big 12, or if you will, the new Pac-12 versus the new Big 12. Because we've seen, Stuart Mandel wrote a piece where he took kind of the raw numbers, I would say somewhat out of context, because it's not taking into context number or a network and window, et cetera. And it looks very good for the Pac-12, that it's typically 300,000 to 400,000 on average better in terms of the viewership per game in those time slots and windows. Big 12 fans would argue, well, hey, there's quite an advantage with that after dark slot where there's no competition and you are on ESPN, and so many Big 12 games are on FS1 or ESPNU. And, Sam Bradshaw is a guy from Sikkim 365 that's done a lot of in-depth reporting on that and trying to provide some more context there. So my question to you would be, for the TV networks, how are those numbers evaluated? How much context does go into that? And is it as simple as just pulling the raw numbers that are out there and saying, well, the Pac-12 does draw better, is more of a draw?
There's a lot of research that's done, but in looking at them, and I saw Stuart stuff and I've seen Sam's stuff as well. And I think, it is important to take into consideration the windows, how much competition in the windows, what channels the games ultimately air on, broadcast versus cable, ESPN versus FS1, ESPNU versus ESPN2. All those things really need to be taken into consideration. I think at the end of the day, the conferences are very similar in terms of value to the broadcast networks. I would certainly probably think that the Big 12 has probably a bit more rabid fan base than the Pac-12 does. The Pac-12 schools are West Coast and everything that brings, so
Yeah.
they're just so it's just so, and I grew up there, so I totally get it. There's just a little different animal. They aren't quite as, there's a very rabid fan base, but it's not as big and it's not as rabid as what you see in the Big 12.
Well, the final question I will have for you then, and I don't mean to put you on the spot too much, but who do you think winds up with the more lucrative next TV contract, the Big 12 or the Pac-12?
I think in total dollars, it'll be the Big 12 because they've got two more schools. I think at the end of the day, though, on a per school basis, they're probably going to be pretty close. Like I said, the Big 12's got to come up with $80 million just to keep everybody whole, and then spread the rest of it, 12 ways. Whereas the Pac-12, or what will be the Pac-10, only has 10 folks at the table. So I think on a per school basis, they're going to end up very close. I think they all should be very happy if they get up, anything over $35 to $40 million is going to be very important. And the sooner I guess everybody comes to grips that they're not going to be getting 75 million like, the Big Ten is, the better off everybody's going to be.